Dean Martin walked onto the Tonight Show stage on September 14th, 1987, and everyone laughed. They always laughed. That was the deal. Dean stumbles a little. Dean slurs his words. Dean holds a glass of whiskey like it's the only friend he's ever needed. America's favorite drunk. The coolest man alive. The guy who made alcoholism look like a lifestyle choice. But Johnny Carson wasn't laughing. Johnny had known Dean for 32 years. They'd shared stages, shared parties, shared the kind of late-night conversations that only happen between men who've seen each other at their worst. And tonight, for the first time in all those years, Johnny saw something behind Dean's eyes that terrified him. The glass in Dean's hand was filled with apple juice. It had always been apple juice. For 30 years, Dean Martin had pretended to be drunk on stage while being completely sober. It was the greatest acting performance in entertainment history, and almost nobody knew. But tonight, Dean's hand was shaking. And the tremor had nothing to do with alcohol. 3 months earlier, Dean Paul Martin Jr., Dean's eldest son, had been killed when his F-4 Phantom jet crashed into a mountain during a California Air National Guard training mission. He was 35 years old, a pilot, a tennis champion, a son who had finally made his father proud. And now he was gone. Dean hadn't spoken publicly about it. He'd canceled some shows, missed some appearances, but he'd never talked about what losing Dino Jr. had done to him. That wasn't Dean's style. Dean didn't talk about pain. Dean made jokes. Dean sang songs. Dean pretended everything was fine while the world burned around him. Johnny knew all of this because he'd called Dean every week since the accident. Most of those calls went unanswered. When Dean did pick up, his voice was flat, empty, like someone had reached inside him and removed whatever made him Dean Martin. So when Dean's manager called to say Dean wanted to do the Tonight Show, Johnny was surprised and worried. "Is he ready?" Johnny asked. "He says he needs to do it. He says if he doesn't get back on stage soon, he never will." The audience that night had no idea what they were witnessing. They saw Dean Martin, the legend, doing his usual routine, the stumbling entrance, the slurred one-liners, the casual sipping from a glass that everyone assumed was filled with bourbon. But Johnny saw the truth. Dean's movements were mechanical, rehearsed, like a man going through motions he'd performed 10,000 times before. The jokes landed, but there was no joy behind them. The famous Dean Martin charm was still there, but it was hollow now, a mask worn by someone who had forgotten what his real face looked like. Johnny played along for the first segment. He laughed at Dean's jokes. He set up the usual bits. He let the audience believe everything was normal. But during the commercial break, Johnny leaned over to Dean and whispered something that made Dean's entire body stiffen. "I know about Dino, and I know you're dying inside. When we come back, we can keep doing the act. Or we can talk. Really talk. Your choice." Dean stared at Johnny for a long moment. The studio lights were hot. The makeup artist rushed over to touch up Dean's face. The stage manager counted down the seconds until they were live again. Dean didn't say anything. He just nodded, almost imperceptibly. When the cameras came back on, Johnny made a decision that would change the entire direction of the interview. "Dean, we've known each other a long time. Too long, Johnny. You're starting to look old." The audience laughed. But Johnny didn't take the bait. "I want to ask you something, and I want you to give me a real answer. Not a Dean Martin answer. A real one." Dean's smile flickered. The glass in his hand stopped halfway to his lips. "That sounds dangerous, Johnny. Real answers are bad for my image. How are you doing? Really doing?" The question hung in the air like smoke. The audience shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the Tonight Show they were used to. This wasn't the breezy, joke-filled conversation they expected from Dean Martin. Dean was quiet for 5 seconds. 10 seconds. An eternity in television. Then he set down his glass. "You know, Johnny, I've been doing this act for 30 years. The drunk thing. The I don't care about anything thing. And it worked. It worked so well that sometimes I forgot it was an act," the audience murmured. What was happening? But a few months ago, something happened that broke the act. Something I can't joke about. Something I can't pretend didn't destroy me. Johnny leaned forward. "Tell me." Dean's voice cracked, and for the first time in his entire career, Dean Martin looked vulnerable on camera. My son died, Johnny. My boy, Dino. He flew his plane into a mountain, and they didn't find him for 4 days. 4 days he was up there, alone, and I couldn't do anything. I couldn't save him. I couldn't even say goodbye. The audience gasped. Many of them hadn't known. The story had been in the papers, but Dean Martin's son dying wasn't the kind of news that penetrated everywhere. And hearing it from Dean himself, in his own broken voice, was something else entirely. I've made a career out of pretending nothing matters, Dean continued, out of acting like life is just one big party. But you know what? It matters. All of it matters. And I wasted so much time pretending it didn't. Johnny's eyes were glistening. Dean, you don't have to... Yeah, I do. I've been carrying this for 3 months, and if I don't say it out loud, it's going to kill me. Not the drinking. The drinking was always fake. What's going to kill me is the silence. The audience was stunned. The drinking was fake? Dean Martin, the most famous drunk in America, didn't actually drink? Dean seemed to read their confusion. Yeah, that's right. It's apple juice, always has been. My mother was an alcoholic. Destroyed our family. I watched her drink herself to death when I was a kid. You think I'd actually do that to myself? The drunk thing was an act, a character, a way to keep people from getting too close. He laughed bitterly. And it worked. Boy, did it work. I've got millions of fans who love Dean Martin, the character, the drunk, the guy who doesn't give a damn. But how many of them actually know me? How many of them know Dino from Steubenville, Ohio, who was so scared of becoming his mother that he pretended to be a drunk just so people would have something to laugh at instead of something to worry about? Johnny spoke softly. I know you, Dean. Yeah, Johnny. You do. You're one of the few. And that's why I'm here tonight, because I can't do the act anymore. I can't pretend everything's fine when my son is dead and my heart is shattered and I don't know how to get through another day. The studio was absolutely silent. 300 people holding their breath, witnessing something they instinctively knew was historic. Tell me about Dino, Johnny said quietly. Not as a performer, as a father. Tell me about your son. Dean's face crumpled. For a moment he looked like he might break down completely. But then he took a breath, steadied himself, and began to speak. Dino was everything I wasn't. I was a fake. He was real. I pretended to be cool. He actually was cool. I ran away from my problems. He faced his head on. Dean pulled something from his jacket pocket, a photograph, worn at the edges. He held it up for Johnny to see, but didn't show the camera. This was taken 6 months before he died. We were fishing, just the two of us. First time we'd done that in maybe 20 years. I was always too busy, too important, too caught up in being Dean Martin to be Dino's father. His voice broke. That day, on the boat, he told me he was proud of me. Can you imagine that? This kid who had every reason to resent me, every reason to hate me for being absent, for being more of a character than a dad, looked me in the eye and said, Pop, I'm proud of you. And I didn't know what to say. I made a joke, deflected it, did the Dean Martin thing. Tears were streaming down Dean's face now. He made no effort to hide them. That was the last real conversation we ever had. 6 months later, he was gone. And I never told him I was proud of him, too. I never told him he was the best thing I ever did. I never told him that every time I saw him fly those jets, my heart was so full I thought it would burst. Johnny reached across and took Dean's hand. The camera caught it perfectly. 2 legends, 2 men who had built careers on appearing invulnerable, holding hands on national television. He knew Dean. Sons always know. Do they? Because I'm not sure I ever showed him. I was so busy being Dean Martin that I forgot to be his father, and now I'll never get another chance. The audience was weeping openly. Not just a few people, almost everyone. The camera operators were struggling to keep their shots steady through their own tears. I'll tell you something, Johnny. Something I've never told anyone. I'm listening. The night before Dino died, he called me, just to talk. Nothing important, just checking in. And I was tired. I'd had a long day, and I cut the conversation short. Told him I'd call him back tomorrow. Dean's voice dropped to a whisper. Tomorrow never came. That 10-minute conversation I was too tired to have, that was my last chance, and I blew it, because I thought there would always be more time. There's never more time, Johnny. There's only right now. Johnny squeezed Dean's hand tighter. Dean, you can't blame yourself for... Yes, I can. And I do. Every single day. But here's what I'm learning, Johnny. What I'm trying to learn. Guilt doesn't bring anyone back. Regret doesn't rewind the clock. The only thing I can do now is tell the truth. Stop hiding behind the act. Stop pretending everything's a joke. And maybe, if I'm honest enough, if I'm vulnerable enough, someone watching this will hear me and do something different. He looked directly into the camera. If you've got a kid, call them tonight, not tomorrow. Tonight. Tell them you love them. Tell them you're proud of them. Don't make a joke. Don't change the subject. Just say the words, because you might not get another chance. I didn't. The audience was destroyed. 300 people united in grief, in recognition, in the sudden urgent need to call someone they loved. Johnny let the silence stretch. He understood instinctively that this moment didn't need filling. It needed space. Finally, Dean spoke again. You know what the worst part is? People keep telling me he's in a better place, that he's at peace, that I should take comfort in God's plan. His voice hardened. I don't want him in a better place. I want him here. I want to hear his laugh. I want to watch him fly. I want to have that fishing trip again. And this time, when he says he's proud of me, I want to put down my guard and say it back. That's what I want. Not comfort. Not platitudes. Just one more day with my son. Johnny nodded slowly. I understand. Do you, Johnny? Have you ever lost someone like this? Someone who was part of you? Johnny was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. My brother died in World War II. He was 19 years old. I was 15. And I spent the next 50 years trying to fill the hole he left. Dean looked at Johnny with new recognition. You never talk about that. Neither do you. Neither does anyone. That's the problem. We all walk around with these wounds, these losses, these holes in our hearts, and we pretend everything's fine. We perform, we entertain, we make people laugh so they won't see how much we're hurting. The show must go on. But at what cost, Dean? At what cost? Dean shook his head slowly. I don't know anymore. I used to think the cost was worth it. The fame, the adulation, the money. But none of it means anything without someone to share it with. None of it matters when your son is lying on a mountainside and you can't even get to him. He picked up his glass again, looked at the apple juice inside, and laughed bitterly. 30 years of fake drinking. 30 years of pretending. And for what? So people would love a character instead of a person? So I could hide from my own life? What a waste. What a goddamn waste. He set the glass down hard. I'm done, Johnny. I'm done with the act. I'm done pretending. If people don't like the real Dean Martin, that's fine. At least they'll be rejecting something real instead of loving something fake. Johnny leaned back in his chair and looked at his old friend with something like awe. Dean, what you just did took more courage than anything I've ever seen on this stage. It doesn't feel like courage. It feels like desperation. Like if I don't tell the truth, I'm going to suffocate. That's what courage is. Doing the thing that terrifies you because the alternative is worse. Dean smiled sadly. When did you get so wise, Johnny? I've been watching you for 30 years. I learned from the best. The show went to commercial, but the mood in the studio had fundamentally shifted. When they came back, Johnny didn't try to return to the usual format. He let the conversation continue, deeper and more honest than any Tonight Show interview before or since. Dean talked about his childhood in Steubenville, about his mother's drinking, about the poverty he'd escaped and the fame that had saved him and trapped him at the same time, about Jerry Lewis and the partnership that had made him famous and the breakup that had devastated him more than he ever admitted. He talked about Frank and Sammy and the Rat Pack, about how the three of them had created an image of effortless cool that was actually carefully constructed, meticulously rehearsed, and emotionally exhausting to maintain. "You know what Frank used to say?" Dean asked. He said, "Never let them see you sweat." And I took that to heart. I never let anyone see anything. And now my son is dead, and I realize I spent my whole life hiding from the people who might have actually loved me. Johnny asked the question that everyone was thinking. "What happens now, Dean? Where do you go from here?" Dean was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know. I've never not known before. I always had the act to fall back on, the drunk guy with the easy smile and the clever jokes, but I can't do that anymore. It would feel like a betrayal of Dino, of myself, of everything I should have been." He looked at Johnny with eyes that were red but clear. "I think I'm going to disappear for a while. Not die, just disappear. Go somewhere quiet. Try to figure out who Dean Martin is when he's not performing. I'm 70 years old, Johnny, and I don't know who I am. Isn't that pathetic? It's human. It's the most human thing I've ever heard you say. I spent 70 years being inhuman, being a character, being whatever people wanted me to be. Maybe it's time to just be a person, a broken, grieving, confused person who doesn't have all the answers." Johnny stood up from his chair. He walked around the desk and sat on the edge of the guest chair, right next to Dean. The camera scrambled to adjust. "Dean, I want to tell you something, and I want you to really hear it. I'm listening. You're not pathetic. You're not a failure. You're a man who built an empire out of nothing, who made millions of people happy, who raised children and loved women and lived a life that most people can only dream of. And yes, you made mistakes. Yes, you hid behind a character. Yes, you have regrets. But that doesn't erase everything else. It makes you human, and human is enough." Dean's composure finally broke completely. He buried his face in his hands and sobbed. Not the polished, performative emotion of an entertainer. The raw, ugly, uncontrollable sobbing of a father who had lost his son. Johnny put his arm around Dean's shoulders and held him while he cried. The audience watched in stunned silence. This wasn't supposed to happen. This wasn't how television worked. But here it was, happening anyway, because grief doesn't follow scripts, and pain doesn't wait for commercial breaks. When Dean finally composed himself, he looked up at Johnny with something like gratitude. 32 years, Johnny. 32 years we've known each other, and this is the first time I've ever cried in front of you. It's the first time you've let yourself be real in front of anyone. Better late than never, I guess. It's never too late for the truth, Dean. It's never too late to start being yourself. The show ended differently that night. No jokes, no songs, no easy send-off. Just two men sitting together, the weight of everything they'd shared still hanging in the air. Johnny looked into the camera one final time. "Tonight, something extraordinary happened. A man who spent his entire career making us laugh showed us something else. He showed us his heart, his pain, his humanity. And I think that's more valuable than any joke, any song, any performance. So thank you, Dean. Thank you for trusting us with the truth. And for everyone watching at home, remember what Dean said. Call the people you love. Don't wait for tomorrow. Tomorrow isn't promised to anyone." Dean Martin never did another major television appearance after that night. He retreated from public life, just as he'd said he would. He spent his remaining years quietly, out of the spotlight, trying to make peace with the loss that had broken him. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button. Share it with someone who might be hiding behind their own mask. Drop a comment about a time when you finally let someone see the real you. And remember what Dean Martin learned in his final years. The love you get for being fake will never satisfy you. Only the love you get for being real can do that. So take off the mask. Stop the act. Let people see who you really are. That's enough. That's always been enough.